Welcome to the RJLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to discuss the situation in Britain. The context of today's discussion is that Boris Johnson, BJ, has left office. Liz Truss has become the Prime Minister, the third female Prime Minister of Britain, and Queen Elizabeth II is ill. I want to divide today's discussion in two parts. In the first part, I want to discuss the general economic and political situation in Britain. I want to link back to an article that I wrote, a blog post that I wrote over 2.5 years ago, after the election that sent BJ a new mandate. And in the second part of today's discussion, I want to make, you could say, a eulogy on the British Empire and the Queen, just in case she is not long for this world. I have also made an exception by writing something that I will read, so that I think it is more proper. Nevertheless, let's start with the first step, or the first part of today's podcast. Let's look at Britain. How is Britain today? I think after the Brexit vote, there was a great opportunity for Britain to unshackle itself from the let's call it economic bondage, the regulatory deadlock of the European Union, that Britain could be again a hub for free trade, and that Britain could look after Britain could look after the interests of its own people and build really a better future for its residents, for its citizens. I think, in my view, I thought that Jeremy Corbyn could have won that election, because I thought that Corbyn represented the interests of the British working class, and that his programs and that of John McDonnell, I know that a lot of people don't agree with me on this, but I think their programs really provided an opportunity for an exercise of socialism in a capitalist society in the 21st century, when the productivity gains of the past few decades could have led to a rise in the living standards of everyone, but that due to an unequal and uneven and unfair distribution of wealth, most of these productivity gains have resulted in the fast accumulation of wealth in a select few, while the working class, most of the wage earners indeed, have only had marginal improvements in their standards of living. That is something that I think Jeremy Corbyn could have had some solution. At least that would be an alternative to that was worth trying. I was disheartened indeed by the failure of the Labour Party, and of course it has been shown later that this failure is something that is institutionalized. It was a failure of the Labour Party as an institution. Under those circumstances, I wrote the blog called Afterglow on the British Empire. And my argument at that time was that the British citizens, the Brits, mistook the British identity. They confused the British identity with elitism of the British Empire. They thought that they were still a great empire. They thought that the preservation of the British Empire, essentially that's what I think a lot of people thought. They thought that was a preservation of their way of life. They thought that Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party of that time represented a, I would say, Leninist, a Marxist stream that is anti-capitalist, that is not a, how to say, not true to the British Empire. I think that is a lot of the reason that people voted for Boris Johnson, because I think a true Brexiter would be Jeremy Corbyn, and Jeremy Corbyn has long been a Eurosceptic. He did not like the European Union for a very different reason, not because the European Union imposed regulations that suppressed the interests of the British business class, some of them, but because the European Union made regulatory framework so cumbersome and bureaucracy so burdensome that the living standards of the British working class were hampered, and that because of the influx of European workers, who, especially those from the new European member states, the eastern states, that brought wages down in Britain. That was a threat to labor, to the working class, and that was the reason Corbyn was against it, or was somewhat against it. And I think Corbyn is the true Brexiter. But most people who in Britain voted for Brexit not because they wanted to improve the rights of the working class, of the working people in Britain. They voted it because they wanted to, they imagined themselves always to be and still to be that great empire. And I think that was the reason that BJ got elected. Even though the guy was not really a Brexiteer, he did not really support Brexit until he realized that, or he calculated that if he opposed Brexit, he had no chance of becoming the prime minister. So he did what he did in order to become the British prime minister, and he did so. And the guy did not disappoint. In under 2 years, just over 2 years, he not only squandered all the opportunities that Britain once had after Brexit, but he also managed to bring Britain back to the 1970s with possible rolling blackouts and already 3-day work weeks in some factories that are to be implemented this winter. And we see that things were going to get worse before it gets any better. The pound sterling is also heading towards parity with the dollar, with the US dollar, and that is another blow to the ego of the Brits, who voted for BJ because of their ego, essentially. Well, I think this is simply, I think BJ's election over 2 years ago was just what portended the final exit of Britain from being an important country on the world stage. It will remain an important country in Europe, even though it does not want to belong to Europe, and it may still be an important ally for the United States in the context of Europe. But it will, I think, from now on, cease to be an important power on the world stage. And let me see if I have some other things to say. well, Liz Truss, that's going to be, I think, a disaster compared to Boris Johnson, who is a very poor manager, but relatively good campaigner. Liz Truss is poor in both, and I think is poorer in both. Liz Truss has no new ideas, and it is very strange that she got elected. And it just shows that how racist essentially the Tory party still is. The Tories voted for Liz Truss for the simple reason. There is no other reason. The simple reason is that Rishi Sunak is Indian in heritage, is of Indian extraction, and Liz Truss is pure English. That's the only reason, because Rishi Sunak is indeed part of the oligarchs and part of the oligarchy, and he would be one of them, but they could not vote for him because he's not white. That's essentially what it is. And that means that Britain still has a long way to fall, and perhaps at some point Rishi Sunak would pack his suitcases and of course his bank account and move back to India, where it may just be a wealthier and more prosperous place in a few decades' time. I don't know about that, but that's a possibility. We will see, and as Liz Truss makes more blunders, I think perhaps we will have some material to discuss. Now let's move on to the second part of today's podcast. Let's talk a little bit about Queen Elizabeth II. She is the longest-lived and reigning British monarch, and according to Wikipedia, she has the second longest reign of any recorded monarchs, after Louis XIV, which is of course a king of France. I would say quite a century, less than a century before the French Revolution. I think she has had a very interesting reign. She has essentially overseen the collapse of the British Empire. She did not cause it. I think it was inevitable before she even became the monarch. But as she took her reign, this was how to say, when she became the queen, she was reigning over still the largest empire in the world at the time. But over the years, her African possessions all became independent. And the colonies where the British committed genocide, mostly Australia and Canada, they have functionally, I would say, become fully independent, and politically, I think they are 99% independent. And with her gone, after her death, which will be inevitable, I think a lot of these places, Canada, Australia, very likely will become republic. And there is even a movement, although a much weaker movement, within Britain of republicanism. So that is really a long fall. But I think that she will be remembered, and she will be remembered very fondly, because she will be remembered as the lasting symbol of a reimagined empire that used to be ruthless yet mercantile. This is the empire that sailed across the world, that essentially became what was called at one time the empire on which the sun never set. And well, her story is a sad one, losing about almost everything that her ancestors fought for, and fought for not so honorably. She has given the British Empire, I think, a much more palatable, much more humane image that most will remember. And this will conceal a lot of the crimes that this empire committed. I think it is a fitting end for the greatest empire that, it is a fitting end for the greatest empire to have come out of Europe since the Romans did 2,000 years ago. And I hope, obviously, I still hope for the sake of Britain, for the spirit especially of Britain, of the British people, most of whom are the working class, even though I know a lot of people in Britain think that they are quote-unquote middle class. Nobody wants to think that they are working class. Most people who have some education don't want to think that they are of the working class. But if you have to work, if you live on a wage, you are the working class. Make no mistake. And for the working class, for the spirit of the working class, especially the working class that don't consider themselves the working class, because those are the ones who are somewhat quote-unquote conservative. Those are the ones who read such outlets as The Sun and the Daily Mail. They are the ones who will be the most disheartened. So I think for the sake of Britain, I hope that the Queen can live another few years. Because I think these next few years, with Liz Truss as the Prime Minister, with the worsening energy crisis across Europe, with global financial crisis, and with a possible collapse, not necessary collapse, but a possible collapse of the British pound sterling, I think that the British people really need her guidance. They need to believe that they are still an empire, and she is the last reminder for them that Britain used to be great. Unfortunately, Britain will not be great. But for the moment, if it takes away the pain, if it makes the pain just a little bit better for the people, I hope that she can live another few years. That is today's podcast. And indeed, for the last part, I did not really read because I only wrote a few sentences, not the entire second part of today's podcast. But I hope that I did not make too many mistakes, and I have not, made this topic, this discussion, unbefitting for the solemnity that it so rightfully deserves. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.